Jacoby Lane, candidate for Minnesota governor. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. We've had a pretty productive day today. We stopped by the Bernie Sanders rally. Um, what else did we do? I made a couple videos for the campaign. Yeah, it was a good day. It's getting to
Yeah.
the end of the day though.
Was that the one for Peggy Flanagan down at First Ave?
Yeah, the Peggy, Ilhan, Keith Ellison, and then Bernie. Yeah.
Yes. Ugh. It looked like such a. I wanted to go. It looked like it was going to be fire. I hope it was. I hope it was everything I I imagined it would be.
It looked good.
Um, all right. So, without further ado, I believe in the amount of time since you were here last on the show, you and your campaign have released your 100-day plan for Minnesota. What do you want people to know about your plan? Because they can go and look at it, by the way, over on your website. It is available for everyone to download, look at, pick apart. But what do you want people to know about it?
Yeah, the thing that I think is most critical that I'd like to see more public servants in the future doing is building in an accountability tool. You can check my work. Day one, you can check off, like, have I seated people? Have I used the executive orders to protect against price gouging, things like that? A weekend, have I started seating commissioners and people to commissions? In the first budget, in the first policy year, can you see that I have, or can you see that I have not only delivered um, the bill, like the language to the legislature, but also the thing with ours is that when it comes to the budget and like the policy years, there's actually two check marks. There's one for me when I've delivered it to the legislature, and there's another one when they have passed it. And so a big part of that is not just voting for me, but sending me the legislators that will actually vote for these bills. So I think that I want to see other politicians put more accountability tools into their platforms, because a platform without a plan is just a bunch of broken or empty promises, and I refuse to be that type of person. Not only is it important for me to help myself accountable, but you should be able to hold me accountable as well. In that, I think we should also have like a public accountability dashboard. If something isn't getting through, the public should be able to know which office is holding it up, what we're waiting on. That way people know who they can contact to help move this process along.
That sounds like such a wonderful innovation, and it sounds kind of like a formalization of what we've seen in places like New York City, where like Zoran Mamdani, like a lot of people have been talking about how he is such a clear communicator about what he's doing, what the city is doing for people, etc. This seems like a very natural evolution from that, where it's now not just like, oh, someone's putting together a video every day that you see on social media, but instead there would be an actual tool to like check progress on different initiatives and different priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it also helps get people more involved too.
Yeah. It kind of welcomes the public into the process of making these initiatives reality.
Exactly. Yes. And that's the biggest thing, is a lot of people feel very disaffected. Like our politics is just happening behind closed doors. They don't know who is managing some of these decisions, where the conversation needs to go, because some of the things that will happen will be genuine bottlenecks that we will run into, and it's about being honest about that. But the public deserves to not remain in the dark on those. So one, it's on me to be transparent and speak on that, but two, having some sort of dashboard on the state website that they can see for themselves.
Why do you, I know this is calling for maybe a little bit of speculation, but why do you think that isn't more of a common place? That seems like such a good idea. Why is that not something that's incorporated more into our political system?
That's a great question. I'm just going to speculate here, but given that there's so much money in our in our political system that does not belong to the people, I think they're really nervous to say that where they're going to act on these things, because really they have to navigate a lot more stakeholders than the people are privy to. And so if they say we're going to have a 3% cap on rent increases, they might actually have to hold themselves accountable to that. And so some people who know that what they're saying are just platitudes, it becomes dangerous for them to have a tool because they're not intending to keep themselves accountable, or they're going to try and obfuscate in whatever ways in which they can to make it seem like it's someone else's fault. Because a lot of our government keeps batting this blame back and forth, but I really think it's the money that's in our political system that it's easier to say Republicans block this bill or Democrats block this bill rather than saying, hey, I took $250,000 from AIPAC and I just can't vote for this. So instead, they try to say that, the other side is blocking it. They're not really divulging who their corporate donors are that are really in a little piece in their ear telling them how to vote.
Yeah. And I think that combines nicely with this next question I was planning to ask you. Did you in a recent interview with Courier Minnesota, you talk about trickle down economics and kind of blast it for the way it's kind of been sold to a lot of folks in America and just hasn't delivered at all. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit for folks here about that?
Yeah. One of the best ways I've heard it explained, I don't know if you know who Richard Wolff is.
Yes.
He's an economist, but he talks about how in the example even of like communism, it's not necessarily its own, I mean, it is an ideology, but what it really is it's a critique of capitalism that says if capitalism, free market capitalism, is so star-spangled awesome, why is it that we haven't seen the reduction in, childhood poverty? Why haven't we seen, people's rising weight, the cost of living keeping up with wages, vice versa, excuse me, wages with the cost of living? And so it really is just a commentary for this Courier article saying that, like, this was our parents' generation. If we want to extend some level of grace and say perhaps it wasn't quite tried in the way that they had prior knowledge for, per se, that maybe they were trying something new, but like, come on, like, the millennials got the short end of the stick. At least Gen Z is getting up here and like getting the cusp of hopefully some change that's on the horizon. I think that democratic socialism is coming, and it's here to stay too. I think it's something that our country, our political system, is going to have to reckon with, especially in the age of information. People know that there is money in politics. People know that they're feeling cheated, and they're hearing that other people are feeling cheated too in this.
Yeah, and it is interesting because I am increasingly seeing in more mainstream forums that specific kind of democratic socialism versus more big business friendly liberalism kind of coming to a head with each other. For a great example of this is actually a recent Star Tribune piece about Amy Klobuchar kind of cozying up to big business in Minnesota, and you're mentioned actually as kind of the exemplifying the antithesis of that, or at least a criticism of that. And I guess when it comes down to, because it's not like your platform is devoid of anything that talks about like helping businesses or anything like that. Why do you think that it's viewed as almost like you are against big business in a lot of these mainstream places? Like it's painting you with, I believe, an unfair brush. I'm just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I feel like when it comes to our economy, I think that people get so wrapped up in this idea of our infrastructure being centered around business. If you don't have a business, you don't have a job. And if you don't have a job, you can't afford anything. But we need to bring it back to the frame of people work at jobs. Our government is supposed to be organized around people. If our economy actually worked and we allowed people to decide where our economy will go, we have such a consumer economy, and it's not even necessarily that people want to buy all these particular products. It's that they don't have any market power to actually, drive the market in where people want new products and services. They just get to consume what's pushed to them, whether that's Labubu toys. My apologies if others are really into the Labubus. Or just, I just think about all of the Instagram and TikTok ads for things that, what may be nice to have, but it's just being pushed at you. And a lot of people are getting tired of this old consumerism. And so we're really just pushing people to buy things for the sake of buying them, not necessarily around like what are the needs of our society. You know, when we build our budget, I think we should build it with the needs of people in mind. Let's start with education, health and human services first. We'll see what are the needs for people's basic human needs. And then we'll look at what we have left over for, what can we put into worker cooperatives through the Department of Employment and Economic Development? What can we put into making sure that we're protecting our environmental resources and then building our way out? I've heard this phrase that a matriarchy is truly about putting children at the center in our society and making sure they have what they need. That means making sure children have housing, and if children have housing, that means their parents have housing. If we make sure that children have food, like with like the school lunch and breakfast program, Lord forbid we should spend our money on nourishing our children. That means that we're taking some of that cost burden off of our parents to make sure that children are at least nourished in our country. If we make sure that our energy grid supports children, make sure no one goes without heat in the winter or, AC in the summertime. If we really build our economy around the needs of people and then seeing what we have for disposable income and allowing the market to see what people really want. Maybe they want to invest in some art. Maybe they want to do a little bit more scientific innovation. But instead of letting these tech bros tell us what the future of our economy is going to be, I think we should do more to really put people at the center and not just like the idea of what the average Joe is, but like the summation of human experiences across our 5.7 million Minnesotans in this state. So that was a long roundabout answer for we need to put people first.
Well, and you mentioned something in there about democratic worker co-ops. Can you I know you've talked about this on social media. We talked about it a little bit last time, but we ran into some tech issues. And I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on what is your vision for democratic worker co-ops in the state? Why do you think that they're important? And how does that fit in with like a people-centered approach to the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So my vision, if we start on what are the issues that worker cooperatives face? The main issue is that many of them can't access starter capital. I spoke with one worker cooperative early in this campaign, and they really struggled to find financing because everyone is a shared owner in the business. Therefore, everyone has an equal percentage of the business, but many traditional banks want to have, one or two guarantors on the loan. And so when they're, asking people on an application, like how many people have more than 5% stake in the company? And it's like, well, technically no one does because we have, 24 employees. And so it's really providing that startup capital for these worker cooperatives because the interest is there. There are so many people who are like interested in what they call converting worker cooperatives. So that means, maybe Larry wants to sell off his bait and tackle business because he's at the end of his life and he just doesn't want to take care of the business anymore. And instead of selling it off to, Blackstone to be the next, investment vehicle, he's like, you know what, my workers, I'll sell it to them. But the struggle is they can't find access to financing in order to purchase that, where they all can work collaboratively together. And so I think the real avenue and how we get this all up and started, that is the task at hand, truly. I don't know if I want to be someone who is trying to direct certain industries because a lot of the purpose of my desire in worker cooperatives is to leave it in local control. If you live in Bemidji or Hermantown or you live in Owatonna or Rochester And if you want a worker cooperative and you and your neighbors, your friends have identified actually a really good area of commerce, whether that's in agricultural, farming, maybe you're creating some sort of product, maybe we're bringing back textiles or creating like an artwork cooperative of sorts. It's about making sure that we have financing available for them to start those. So it's not necessarily the state saying these are the industries that we must create. It's your community doesn't want to be ruled by Holiday and the Dollar General. Maybe you have a Walmart in your town. Like, it's one way in which we can finally fight back against these larger conglomerates as we think about publicly traded companies like Target or Walmart or uh, I guess Amazon, but that's maybe not more of a startup size. And so, yeah, I guess the long roundabout answer for this one is just really it's about this is an area where I think local control of their economy really does matter because people deserve to choose what they want to do for work and how they want to support their economy.
And I know that a lot of your campaign has spent time doing listening sessions across the state and like, especially in more rural parts of the state. And I guess I was curious about how, when you talk about democratic worker co-ops, how is that received in greater Minnesota?
I think that's where a lot of the education is. I guess I can't speak to exactly I haven't spoken to someone like from a particularly rural town that was super interested. The ones that I had spoken to was one in, I think it was the St. Cloud area. It was a salon where they wanted to buy it out. I think a lot of the work ahead of us is educating people that there is a pot of money available for you to either do a conversion or doing a startup. Although those are a little more expensive in terms of financing, just because they need a lot of resources. Yeah, conversions, from what I've heard with, it's an organization called Cooperative Development Services out here in Minnesota, but they said conversions are a little bit more of the avenue that most businesses take. I think it takes a matter of connecting people to resources. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think that the state needs a more robust tool for connecting people to resources, whether that is housing, whether that is business financing. I know if I imagine myself starting a business today, my first thought would be, ask the Small Business Administration. But a lot of people probably don't know much more than that. So if we had a singular area, like with a public accountability dashboard or something, we could build in a tool that shows people all the exact offices they need to apply to. Yes, I'm thinking about this all as we
Yeah.
go.
Absolutely. And I guess to play just devil's advocate for a moment, I know that when I talk about worker co-ops on my show, there are oftentimes conservatives in the audience who will be like, well, why should the state be putting up money at all for these democratic worker co-ops? And so just to put it to you, what is your argument? Why should the state be investing in democratic worker co-ops?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a lot of these rural communities, what I would say is, I think you and I can agree that the power of hard work is very important. And I think that those who are doing the labor of, putting in your 40 hours every week should be able to enjoy what is created from that. I can tell them that there's a certain class of people who actually make their money from no hard work at all. Their hard work is holding a piece of paper that says a certificate of ownership, whether that's in a share of the company, whether that's they are the official business owner. I think that a lot of them, I feel like a lot of folks who are hesitant about worker cooperatives are because they maybe don't trust one or two people on their team, and they're like, Jeffrey and Sue, they're knuckleheads. I wouldn't want them being in charge of any business decisions. And what I would say to that is, do you trust everyone else on your team, to, as a group, decide what's best? How many times have people been passed over for bonuses or raises or felt like they weren't included in a decision that really you have some great insights that you want to bring in, but because you're not, maybe a vice president of the company, or you're not a senior manager, that you just are overlooked in your input. It's about making sure that we're not only democratizing our political structures, but that we're democratizing our economy as well. We don't want, it's like the phrase, like, we don't want kings, but yeah, we somehow allow it in our economic system. The CEOs by any other name would be a king in our economy, and arguably sometimes I think CEOs have more power than our elected officials do. They can operate as much as they want under the free market capitalism versus our elected leaders are bound by the Constitution. So, yeah, I think it's a lot of education. I think that's where the work is ahead of me, is kind of like getting people to understand, like, what is it that is better about worker cooperatives, and getting them to know that they get the ownership. They also get, the benefits of it. Another phrase I might use that some either conservative folks or just other folks that happen to live in rural Minnesota is like, can we use the example of, do you believe people take care of things that they own? And I assume for most people, the answer will probably be yes. And so it's like, well, if you had ownership in the company you worked for, do you think that you'd be incentivized to work harder? Do you think that you would like to make sure you're a part of this team, to make sure that not only you are benefiting, but everybody in your community is doing better? Another reason to support worker cooperatives is, if there's some sort of market shock, you're not going to see your hometown, you're the business in your hometown, pick up and head to Vietnam or head to Laos or somewhere else where, the corporate class continues to get the benefits, but the only difference is now you've lost your job, and now they're, using, child labor, other labor violations in other countries. Yeah, long roundabout way of saying that, yeah, worker cooperatives almost always stay in the community. They absorb the shock. If there's like some sort of hit to the economy, it's most likely that you're going to take a reduction in hours. You might take, a couple dollars an hour pay cut, but that no one person is going to bear the burden of any of the negative effects of business. It's that you all share it, you all win together, and you lose together.
And it also seems like I talk a lot about democratic worker co-ops as well, but it keeps the money also local, because if people are getting paid more locally, that's more money circulating in your local economy.
Yes. I was going to say, that kind of leads me into my segue into like why I'm really wanting to go after like publicly traded companies. Like, I want to see us have a $25 an hour minimum wage for publicly traded companies, making sure that they're required to do union elections annually, making sure that workers on strike, people in unions, can tap into unemployment insurance. Because what this ultimately comes down to is the classic phrase, like, great power comes great responsibility. And oftentimes when we think about taxing and what should people be paid, they often leave out the fact that the Walmarts, the Targets of the world, have so much market power that what have they done to compensate the ma and pa shops that have gone out of business because they cannot compete with the Walmarts and the Targets? And so that's partially why I'm fighting for a progressive corporate tax rate, because we're not trying to go after the ma and pa like shops. They think they should pay a lower corporate rate. But when we get up to the Targets, the Amazons, the Nikes, the Abercrombie and Fitch, insert whatever larger brands, they are the ones that need to be compensating the people of Minnesota for the power that they have, because a lot of the externalities they haven't paid for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say, before we move on from worker co-ops, that it seems to me that a lot of people, a lot of people just haven't ever heard the case for worker co-ops before. And if they, I think it's actually a very intuitive idea to a lot of people. I think that, especially in rural America, because I grew up in spending my summers in Moose Lake and like Brainerd and all across Minnesota, and I saw those Walmarts roll in, and you could see in a lot of these small towns, like, it would just destroy all of the mom and pop shops. They slowly went out of business over the years, and I can think of like I think it's a very compelling message to put out there. Hey, this is a way to save rural America. Like this is the vehicle to do that. If you don't want your entire, town steamrolled into a parking lot for your local Walmart and Home Depot, like this is the way to do it.
Yeah, because otherwise, we could put the dollars up for a traditional business, but then again, you only get one or two people who get the benefits of business ownership, and then everybody else makes some sort of wage labor. And so it's almost like we're just kicking the can down the road. A worker cooperative really is the way to allow communities to take control of their economy. Take control of the benefits of what happens through their business. Like you said, a lot of that money stays local, and what the end goal is that we'd have, I'll shoot out a random number, 10,000, cooperative enterprises across the state, and they are doing in concert together for coordinating supplies. And so everybody is helping Minnesota communities across the state, whether they need supplies or services. Um, and that way, it's just not being. I come back to this extractive element. Like I think about, yes, does Walmart pay their employees not enough? $12, $13 an hour is not enough. And so you see all of that go out to people who are probably not going to visit most rural communities that will ever have a Walmart. And so really, you're just paying dues to your landlord, the Walmart landlord. I think that getting to a place where we can actually have a sustainable cooperative enterprise, an ecosystem of cooperatives, that's the task at hand. But I think it starts with providing funding to get that up and going, because there are some organizations that are working on the financing piece of it. We just need to kind of get it jump started.
Another component of kind of reinvigorating the state is housing, of course. And when most people talk about building housing, they're really talking about building it up, especially in cities. Your Minneapolis, your St. Paul, and the surrounding suburb areas. But your plan specifically talks about building in greater Minnesota, which I found very refreshing. Can you talk a little bit more about that plan and what exactly it entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's passing either like housing infrastructure bonds or other um, rental assistance, just to make sure that people aren't like kicked out of their homes. But I think that we absolutely need to build a lot more homes as we think about a lot of rural communities. They are aging. They are, it's called the rural brain drain. I wrote a bit about it in undergrad, which is this concept that says a lot of students, what they do is they graduate high school, they leave to go to college, but they never have the opportunities to return to their hometowns. And so it's making sure that we're building housing in rural Minnesota, because right now we have a huge shortage. I know on my tribal listening session tour, that was the resounding theme, was that there's just not enough housing, for people who want to live within their communities still. Um, and if we want to think about rural economic revitalization, there's people need a place to go as we think about work from home options, and what the advent of work from home on a more serious scale since COVID has brought us is there are a lot of people who would love to live, up at their cabin. Maybe they would only own one home and they would make it that cabin. And that frees up housing not only in the Twin Cities, it allows people to just have a little bit more freedom of where they go, but they can't go anywhere if it feels like they're only locked into a select number of housing units. Thinking supply and demand, like if we build more housing, that helps address the housing costs across the state, coupling that with the 3% rent cap that we want to do, which I believe is in the plan as well. Because ultimately, what this is about is I'm not going to promise that I can fix all of the issues in the state in 4 years. I like to remind myself that if public governance was easy, we'd have solved the world's problems by now. But what I will know I will have succeeded if we can have set up the system to slowly over time heal itself. So when you have build more housing and that helps bring down the cost, and then you have like a rent cap of 3%, it helps allow your paycheck to catch up to where your housing is. When you keep it at 3%, it makes it less attractive as an investment vehicle. And so people will be more likely to find some other avenue to invest their vehicle rather than invest their money, rather than, um, you know, where was I? Yeah, they'll find something else to invest in, whether that's, stocks or something. But yeah, in just housing, we're trying to make housing a fundamentally unattractive investment vehicle. We're trying to make it ugly so people don't think about putting their money there.
Yeah. You did, however, in your 100-day plan, you mentioned that new buildings would be exempt from rent rules for 15 years. And can you elaborate on that? And like, because I would appreciate it, because it seems like that might be something that might be rife for like loopholing through some of these proposals.
Yes, I absolutely see where you're coming from. So what we found was in St. Paul, for example, they had initially done it the way that I had described. It was a
Mhm.
3% cap, and I think it had an exemption up to 8% given like if the landlord could provide receipts that like, property taxes, utilities, whatever that summation is. But housing permits actually fell dramatically. And so new housing just full on stopped. And so it's this particular rule follows what the St. Paul ordinance has done with that 15-year gap. I agree. It feels like it's compromising. That like just feels like they're going to jack up the rent really fast on this new development. Um, and so that is where the work is ahead of us, is making sure that we are not watching them price gouge, but at least making sure that we've maintained current housing stock that has affordability measures, built into it.
Is that do you think that that's maybe an area where if there aren't investors willing to build those new buildings, that do you think an area where the state would step in and be building?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that there is room for the state to provide for incentives, but I don't want to see like the corporate developers be the first ones to get that money. I want to see it being like I want to see it be like Jimmy Carter's Habitat for Humanity, where like they're the ones who get the funding first because they're the ones that go into it with a model of like not profiting off of people's
Mm.
housing. And so I think if we set up the system so that those kind of actors get the first dibs at the funding, but yeah, because I can 100% see private developers trying to find their loopholes to carve out to see if they can get their money. But if we make sure that it doesn't go there first, I think that they'll have a much harder time.
Okay. To pivot a little bit, obviously everyone in the state of Minnesota has been affected by the smoke coming from the wildfires in the Boundary Waters in Canada. And what like Minneapolis for a day had the dubious honor of being the world's worst air quality. Um, the federal government is now lashing out at Canada and degrading Minnesota's relationship with our friends north of the border in Canada. As governor, what would you do to both maintain that relationship between our state and Canada, as well as address the air quality concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we're having a robust conversation around like controlled burning. I saw somewhere that a lot of the issue is built into a lot of these areas haven't had any sort of burns or any sort of clearing out, and so you see a lot of detritus like on the bottom of the forest floors, and that's what creates a lot of this fuel. I'm not an ecologist by training, and I don't pretend to be.
Uh-oh.
I
Oh.
will listen to the experts on this one, but I know that there is room for a lot more collaboration. If we got to reach out to Ontario, have like the Minnesota Environmental Protection Agency or Pollution Agency reaching out and having a conversation, because this is one area where like our environment is no longer defined by borders. This is about collaboration between all the stakeholders. I'd love to bring tribal leaders in to see like how all we can work together. I can't imagine what northern Minnesota looks like as we think about Boy Ford, as we think about Grand Portage, and we think about people who are homeless and what this air quality has done for
Hmm.
that. And Lord forbid we don't have universal health care. Just, I refuse to believe that we can't do anything about this. Not even to mention like data centers. Like we
Oh,
already have an arid climate up in northern Minnesota that's leading to some of this. So sucking up millions of gallons of water from our water table, we need to do something.
yeah. And speaking of the water table, one of the things that you talk about in your plan, and you've talked about on the campaign trail, is range jobs in up in the Iron Range, and you talk about the future of taconite mining as opposed to copper nickel sulfide mining. What exactly is the relationship there? Like what is the concern for folks who have no reference for what mining in Minnesota is like?
Yes. So copper nickel yeah, copper nickel mining is it's a form of mining that can lead to a lot of pollution that leads to um like acid rain. It's just very toxic for the environment, and the mineralization that we would get is so low that we would just be like it would be like ripping up, you know, the entire carpet of your home for like a tiny gold bead, essentially. And so it's just so not worth it to pursue that. We currently have taconite mining, which is basically mining for iron ore that later gets refined into steel, and that's been one that has been touted as being one of the reasons why the U.S. won World War II, is because a lot of the iron that went into shipmaking came from Minnesota. I think in the year of our Lord 2026, I think that an extraction economy isn't the path forward. I mentioned at the DFL state convention that when it comes to these mining and the potential for cleanup if any pollution got into our national boundary waters, um, it would be catastrophic. Um, and it would be the end of northern Minnesota in some ways. And so I'm very much of the persuasion that like I would sooner invest $1 billion in transitioning our economy away from mining than to pay for $1 billion cleanup should any catastrophic cleanups need to happen if the copper nickel mining ever spilled over into the waterways. And while we're in in that breath, wouldn't it be nice if we invested in worker cooperatives?
Exactly. And you make a connection in a lot of your campaign materials between, this prohibition on copper nickel mining and also a concern for, our water supply. We're the land of 10,000 lakes. Many people, like, that's basically the only thing they know about Minnesota if they're from outside. And you connect it with the growing of manumin. I'm not quite sure on the
Manumin.
Manumin. There we go. Which is better known as wild rice, which is grown in Minnesota. And what exactly, like, is it? Is it that the environmental conditions for growing manumin need to be just so in order to protect its like growth and harvesting? You also obviously plays into indigenous land use and rights. And I guess I was just curious because it appears multiple times in a lot of your campaign materials.
Yeah, so Manumin is sacred to many tribes, and so if the best way I can describe it is see Manumin or wild rice as like yet another family member. And so if we are going to protect, Minnesotans, Manumin being one of them, it's about making sure that the standards that we write make sure that they are at a bar that makes sure that they don't damage Manumin production. One of the treaty rights that are one of the rights that are given through the treaties that we've signed, the U.S. government and many of the tribes, is this law called, or is a right called, why am I not thinking of it? Olfactory? No. I can't remember the exact word, but basically they have a right to fish. They have a right to hunt, even if it's, not on, reservation land, but as long as it's within the treaty borders that are drawn. But it's making sure that we are protecting that not only for them, but for our own sake. Yeah, and a lot of that is making sure that our environment isn't too acidic, which going back to the copper sulfide mining, which is to get the nickel underneath. So you might hear copper nickel mining as well. Yeah, I feel like I wanted to answer it. Do you want to clarify your question again?
Yeah, I guess I was curious, like, what the significance of Manuman is, because it appears so many times in your campaign materials, and I think that a lot of folks who don't have contact with many Indigenous people have no real reference. Like, it might be something that they see when on a road trip through, northern Minnesota at like sold at gas stations and such. Like, but it's just kind of like, oh, that's a roadside tchotchke novelty or something like that. And so I guess I was curious both how that connected with mining, and the water table, but also what the significance of it is, if you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one way to kind of talk about it is, I believe it was back when it was Pipeline 8. Why do I feel like that's the wrong number? But there were like concerns with it damaging, some of like the wetlands.
Mhm.
This is ultimately about the wetlands that foster wild rice, and wild rice being a sacred member for tribal nations. It's about making sure that we are protecting that. And as we see tribes as government to government relationships, we're partners in being stewards of our environment, and that means being a good steward to make sure that we're not damaging Manuman. For example, I believe it was 2 years ago. It might have even been 3 now. We strengthened the standard, or like what the definition of wild rice is in Minnesota. Um, Giving it almost like a personhood. I think there's some work that still needs to be done to give it like full personhood is the best way I can describe it, and that way it can be like so that if you're just like if a pipeline or a mining project is going to damage some wetlands, it gives more of a legal framework for not only the state to sue on, but tribes to sue on as well, because we've granted it this personhood. You've done material damage through negligence or through, malicious intent. A lot of where this comes from is making sure that we're setting up our systems so that we can take advantage of protecting our environment year round. The legislative session is, arguably 4 months, but I'd say even 2 if you want to count committee deadlines before they start just debating them wholesale on the Senate and House floors. So given that there's like a 2-month window, it's about making sure that we can use the court system should there be any bad actors in those other, 8 months, is kind of why I was bringing this forward as an
Yeah.
important feature of our plan.
And when you like, I can see, the Alpha News headlines now, oh, personhood for rice. And like when you say that, you mean like a kind of a scaffolding of legal protections that afford like the strongest kind of legal protections we have to protecting wild rice.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I like the way you use that, legal scaffolding. You're not the first person in my life to use that quite a bit, and I like that term, scaffolding. Um,
Okay.
oh, and I remembered, it's usufructuary rights.
Oh my
If
gosh.
you want some homework, it's usufructuary rights. But those are basically the rights that are granted that allow Indigenous members to continue to fish, farm, harvest. Um, yeah.
I feel like that is a word that requires some careful enunciation. Um,
Absolutely.
okay, so I also wanted to talk, because one of our technical difficulties happened last time while you were talking about your relationship, your campaign's relationship with the tribal nations, and I wanted to kind of pick up that thread and talk about it, because I know you've done listening sessions with those tribal nation leaders, and I was wondering kind of what you got out of that and how they received your campaign. Just talk about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start off, so we met with a member from Red Lake. We met with the council from Fond du Lac. We also met with Grand Portage, and then we met with Upper Sioux over in Granite Falls. And the way I would describe those experiences is nothing short of an honor. 6 months ago, a year ago, I was just a Joe Schmo who went about my life. And so getting to do this campaign and getting, you know, people to take you seriously in some way and be like, oh, if there's a chance you could be the future governor, like, yeah, let's sit down, let's have a conversation. The resounding theme for at least a few of them was that it feels like the state has really neglected them. They might throw them a bone every once in a while, but the state of it is honestly kind of heartbreaking, where it feels like they want to bring them in as like a collaborative partner, but they want to retain all the decision-making authority. And I think that's why in our platform, the way that we have some of these set up is we want tribes to be like the chairs of some of like the commissions or task forces, because they're ultimately what impact their treaty rights. It impacts their environments that are guaranteed to them from the treaty rights. I even had one lesson that I really took to heart was we had been using the term land back, and one member had made the comment that like it kind of is a white people's topic, because it's like land back to who? Because we like the land does not belong to people, not even indigenous neighbors or like in nations. It's almost kind of inverse. It's that we belong to the land. And so for us to have real connection to that land, real like seeing land not as a thing, but yet another person. And so it's truly this reciprocal caring for one another. It was kind of one of the lessons that was really beautiful to have explained to me. It left me very hopeful. It left me very inspired to continue caring for the land. It made me realize that like I know nothing about how to properly care for our environment. And I think that's why we need a lot of these tribes, or we need all of the tribes in on the conversation and having some power behind that, so that they can have teeth on how that we care for our environment. Like I had mentioned, this really is a government to government relationship. So it's seeing them as friends. It's seeing them as co-creators in our environment and the ways that we care for it.
And did you come away from that with kind of an idea of how do you put, we belong to the land? Because I think that's, especially in American legal systems, maybe very difficult to like change the perspective of how the law works. But like how would that change how we do things if we were to adopt? And maybe that's a really big question, obviously.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I think it's less of, and I think this is kind of the, and I know you didn't mean any harm by this, but I think that's fundamentally the thing, is we try to like co-opt things into a slogan, or like try to get people to see it in a different way. But it's really showing with our actions. What does it mean to care for our environment? What does it mean to, lead with our tribal communities instead of like leading in front of these tribal communities? And so I guess today I don't have the exact answer, but I know that it's less about what we say about it, and it's more what we do about our environment.
I can get behind that. And I feel like I should bring this up. In 2021, Governor Walz created the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives Office. And, historically, an overlooked issue in America and in Minnesota especially, they draw their funding from specialty license plates. And there's currently a $12 million shortfall when it comes to rewards for information or for finding people who are missing. Can you talk a bit about that problem? Because one of your campaign promises is to fully fund the MMIR office. And I guess I want to give the floor to you to talk about the issue that it's seeking to solve and, how you would go about funding it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when it comes to building our budget, I think that it's really important that, yet again, we build our budget in there first. If we think about centering our society around the needs of children, if people's mothers are going missing, if people's, two-spirit relatives are going missing, it really impacts the child. And so this is one area where I think that we can put some money up to make sure that we are clearing these cold cases, that we can make sure that we are finding different relatives, whether they're being, killed, sex trafficked, insert other ways they're being disappeared. And so I guess for me, it's giving dedicated funding for it built into our budget. I don't like that, this concept that many people in our polity will say that it's just like, oh, where are you going to get the money for that? As if like you have to raise a new tax for the exchange of finding our indigenous neighbors. Like, have we lost our humanity if we have to if we can't build our budget that includes funding the missing and murdered indigenous relatives office? So yeah, I would say it's probably going to be some sort of discretionary funding, something probably from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension or some other Department of Public Safety kind of funds. But I'll make sure that we get funds there as one of the first places we put our funds.
Absolutely. It's always struck me as very strange that people are averse to funding an office that's literally dedicated to finding missing persons. Like, why would you not want that fully funded? Very bizarre. One of the issues you talked about earlier was a type of brain drain and housing in greater Minnesota. And one of the issues that has been increasingly more of a problem is nursing homes in Minnesota. It's projected we're going to need like 35,000 by 2030, somewhere around there. And there's a lack of beds, there's bad employment conditions. The nursing home organizations recently tried to sue the state because the standards board implemented a minimum wage for employees, and the nursing homes are just like, we don't want to pay a minimum wage to our employees that allows them to live. And despite all this growing need, more nursing homes have been shuttering down, which of course exacerbates the need. So all of these issues are huge, but how would you cut through these issues to make sure elderly Minnesotans receive quality care?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question. So back in 2023, I actually worked as the committee legislative assistant on our Human Services Reform Committee, and we tackled this exact topic. And I can't speak on exactly the issue, like based on how like the last budget was built in or with this particular law change. But what I do know is that in much of the health and human services is that the reimbursement rate for a lot of these services is terribly low. And so it's less like, I think for many businesses, I don't want to color the entire industry. I'm sure there are some that are more malicious. But I think for the vast majority of the industry on the whole, it's that the reimbursement rates are too low. And so it's not that they don't want to pay more. It's just the state, it's hard to pay someone $25 an hour when the state's only going to give them, $12 an hour because they have to come up with that revenue. And as a lot of the people who are in nursing homes to begin with are people who are on medical assistance, they're on Medicaid, Medicare, and these are the rates. And so it's the fundamental business question of how do you keep these doors open? I think that we need to, again, build our budget around the needs of our communities, especially when we think about the two largest employers in rural Minnesota education and healthcare. And precisely like you're saying, it's the nursing homes, it's the disability services. And so it's making sure that we are increasing those reimbursement rates. I know that right now with Donald Trump's one one big bullshit bill, I that it's not going to get better very soon, but with the next president, hopefully we can get significant funding passed in order to like help save our health and human services. However, what we can do is pass the Minnesota health plan so that it covers long-term care, covers disability services. And if we passed it on day one, hypothetically, it still would take us about 2 years to build that system and get it off the ground. So in the short term, it's making sure that we are setting aside that money to make sure that the funds are paid for these higher wages. It's going to be a really, really big pinch. I look forward to seeing what the collaborative conversation is with the legislature. But what I know is in proposing my budgets, it's a building our budget first around education, health and human services first, because that's one that's very near and dear to rural communities, communities in the Twin Cities, as we think about disability services, the Olmstead Plan decision. So it's making sure that people with disabilities don't lose access to their communities. They're not just like shuffled into wards like they were, 60, 70 years ago, where they're just locked out of sight, out of mind. It's important that we're funding, the CADI waiver program, which stands for the Community Access, Community Access of Disability and Disability Inclusion. That just makes sure that they get a chance to people with disabilities can go to the mall, with their support professional. They can go out and do things, that they live a full life. I think that's important to build for our state first.
Absolutely. And over the past 48 hours or so, there have been 2 mass shootings in Minneapolis, and occurring within 24 hours of each other. How would you address gun violence in the state as governor?
Yeah, I think we definitely need an assault weapons ban. I think that it is finally time that we do away with it. Or with assault weapons. The potential for harm is far too great, because it's also not only your right to bear arms, but it's the rights of people to be free from gun violence. People deserve to go to the mall, walk their neighborhoods without feeling like gun violence is going to break out. Also, I know that what we can do is, I believe the state had passed in their bill, you can put what do you want to call it? They reduced the mag size. So instead of being 10 or 12 rounds, I think it's capped at 8 rounds, if I remember correctly. I might have that part exactly wrong. This is the fundamental question in this day and age. I'm interested to see what the legislature would pass. I think the thing that matters to me most is that people deserve to feel like their elected leaders are doing something about gun violence. Mm-hmm. So I want to see if they can get that bill passed, the one that Lisa Dama just left on the table, our Speaker of the House, for those of you who aren't in Minnesota. I'd have to refamiliarize myself with that bill, but from what I remember reading, it was fairly good. I think the dicey part is, given that we have a tyrannical federal government, and being someone who is a minority that is not, that the federal government is not friendly to, I can understand the apprehension of disarming, and I'm not entirely sold that disarming is the answer, but I think that I'm willing to listen to all of my advisors on this as one of the most important issues of today.
Absolutely. Oh, I forgot to ask when we were talking about the nursing homes. You talk a lot about ending the sub-minimum wage. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So the sub-minimum wage is what allows companies to hire people who have disabilities that are at dramatically low wages. So I imagine it's someone, maybe someone has an intellectual disability, and so they come into, say, a grocery store, and they just kind of face the shelves. but that means that their employer can pay them, say, like $2 an hour, like $2 an hour. Yeah.
Oof.
So it's about ending that program, which they had a task force that they have been working on for, I believe, the last at least 4 years. Um, proponents would say it gets, a lot of people with disabilities out in the community to do something that they may otherwise not have. Other uh, people who are not in favor of the program, they're very much like, no, this is just profiting off of disabled people at an astronomically low rate. And I think that we need to get rid of the subminimum wage program and find more opportunities for them to give. Example, like my shoot for the moon dream. If we were able to pass single payer healthcare systems so that our work benefits were no longer tied to being a full-time status or part-time status, you could have everybody working, say, I'll make up a random number, 28 hours, 32 hours a week. And so that way you have, not only are you making space for other people to contribute, but it's also like you have taken that arbitrary balance of like part-time benefits and full-time benefits, and you can get people into work that provides them dignity, and that includes disabled people as well.
Excellent. Thank you for the clarification, because I hadn't encountered the term sub minimum wage before. And it was refreshing to hear you talk about it, so thank you. I also wanted to talk, because we are a little bit over the amount of time we were going to talk yet again, but I do want to ask you, your website includes a unity pledge with the Minnesota DFL to respect the winner of the primary. Why did you feel it was necessary to make such a pledge? Because as far as I can tell, I don't think Amy Klobuchar has made such a pledge.
Yeah, to my knowledge, she also has not made that pledge. To me, it's about, we are in dire times, and every candidate will give them to make their petition to the people, what their differences are, what they're fighting for. And come primary day, the people will speak. And whoever that person is in our political system that wins the primary, it would be very necessary for us to make sure that we have that unity. I do not want to be the candidate that splits the vote, that, allows Mike Lindell, my pillow guy, to get the win.
God forbid.
Oh, and so truly it's saying that we are going to back whoever wins. I would like to see Amy Klobuchar sign that petition. She has not, to the best of my knowledge. But yeah, I think it's about caring more for our democracy and our communities rather than having this need for challenging or being the one that's on the ticket. Like, for me, a lot of what this race even was to begin with was people deserve options in this race. We have a pretty strong progressive base in Minnesota, and if my team hadn't helped me do this, it would have looked as though Amy Klobuchar just, had resounding support from the state at 98% or something like that. And I just don't think that, I think that if I hadn't ran for this office, we wouldn't see just how progressive Minnesota had become, to see how much people were caring so deeply for progressive issues. They were willing to say, this 26-year-old trans woman who used to be a Republican at one day and age, I want her. This is so important for just, I don't know if I want to chalk myself up to like metrics, but saying that a lot of what is important to show in this is that young people, LGBTQ people, demand a seat in the halls of power. Because I actually talked to one gal today at the Bernie Sanders rally who had said, I support you. I saw you at the convention. I support you on all of your issues. I can't vote for you because you don't have enough experience. And I didn't argue with her on that. People deserve to feel like their elected leader can confidently and has the accolades to be able to like do the job. That's important for people to feel like, which kind of gets to the heart of, yes, isn't it pretty disappointing that of all the people that decided to challenge Amy Klobuchar, it wasn't any other progressive incumbents in the state legislature or across the state. It was a 26-year-old trans woman who said, who had the audacity to say, "Nuh-uh, nope, we're giving people options."
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, I did want to ask, there is a memo reported on by the Minnesota Reformer circulating among pro-democracy circles titled Act Free to Be Free, written by Doran, or written in part by Doran Schrantz of Isaiah. And it lays out a plan to mobilize civil society against potential power grab from the federal government. And especially because a lot of people are very worried about the upcoming midterms. And I know your focus is on the primary right now, but do you share that worry? And what would you have to say for folks who are worried about the federal government interfering in Minnesota's elections? What would you say to them, and what do you think they could do?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking on this, especially given that I think it was last Thursday, the White House put out their election integrity page or something like that. And it just sounds like the White House is setting the stage to call the 2026 illegitimate. And to my core, I feel like something bad is coming. I can't say what or to what degree. I don't think that the president is going to take the results of this election very well. I hope that I'm overreacting in my reaction. I hope that everything is better than I think not only myself, but I'm sure many of your viewers are thinking it will be. I see less issue with the elections in Minnesota per se. I mean, he'll have his own bully pulpit that he will speak from about the Minnesota elections. I worry about him being able to mobilize a lot of people who feel like it is yet again a stolen election, that, if we take back the House, take back the Senate, if we file articles of impeachment, if he is, convicted of that, will he leave willingly, or is this going to be, I don't mean to prescribe some sort of apocalypse, but I'm left wondering to what degree Donald Trump is going to interfere in this election.
And what do you think the average person can do if they are worried about election interference, or worried about, aspersions being cast on the results?
Yeah. Well, definitely vote. They will sort out the legitimacy of votes. Make sure you vote. Your voice deserves to be heard. But I think that find confidence that there are people. I've had no reason to doubt that Steve Simon is going to protect our voter rolls. Yeah, I feel like Minnesota at least has some people at the forefront who are going to do everything within their power to protect our elections and our people. I worry for what the balance of power is at the federal level is more my concern.
Yeah. And for our final question, it's not even really a question. I want to give you the floor to make your case to folks at home who may be interested, may not be interested in what you are talking about, but make your case. Why should people vote for you in the Democratic primary for Minnesota's governor?
Yeah, especially with this wave of democratic socialists who are taking this country in races by storm, I can tell you that the masses are waking up, that corporations, the Epstein class, they are invested in these elections, whether you are or not. And they're invested literally and metaphorically. That if you're not paying attention, they are making the decisions on your behalf. I understand that for a lot of folks, politics is overwhelming. Politics is it's time consuming. It costs a lot of cognitive bandwidth. And I know what it's like to just be surviving, and then adding on the world's problems is just, it's exhausting. And I see you. I feel that energy, and I don't blame you for being tired. It's important that we stay strong, that we educate ourselves on what are the issues, because again, there are so many people, so many actors, so many corporations that are invested in what happens to you in your life, that if you blink, you will miss it. We get 2 days every two. We get, the primaries and the general elections every couple years in order to vote, and it's important that you make yourself heard. It's very important and critical now more than ever.
All right, Kobe Lane, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here, and thank you for running for Minnesota governor.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and I wish you well in your on election day.
Thank you.
Bye. Folks, you can, of course, learn more about Kobe's run for the governor of Minnesota, the gubernatorial race, over on kobeforgovernor.com. That'll be a link down in the description below. And if you got anything out of that, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought about the interview, what you think about Kobe's policies. And also, get involved with your local Dems. Get involved with your local Democrats. Get involved with your local DSA. If you need help doing that, join our Discord. Reach out to Gamergy for help with DSA. Reach out to Dragonfly for help with your local Dems. We want folks to get involved in their local political process so that we can get as many of you at the levers of power as we possibly can, because it genuinely makes a difference. When you get involved in your local politics, it is vitally important, and it makes a real difference. You can actually save lives on the local level. It is a powerful, powerful part of our government. So, get involved, and folks, last but not least, check out ImogeneOlivia.com, gender euphoric lingerie designed from the ground up for trans femmes, tested with cis men, cis women, non-binary folks. It is comfortable, sexy lingerie that's non-tucking. And we just got a full restock. There's a new color. Go check it out, ImogeneOlivia.com. Link down in the description. And now sizes go up and down one additional size. So there you go. Check it out. Let's keep on going.
Riverboat Jack is coming to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube and swishy streams. All that content is bursting the seams. Politics, being and plenty more. Your sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord. Riverboat Jack.